Thank you for returning for our afternoon session of NIFA Listens, Investing in Science to Transform Lives. My name is Megan Hayden, and I am moderating this afternoon session. And up first, we have Dr. Glenda Humiston from the Agricultural and Natural Resources program at the University of California.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be able to be here today. I'm glad I was in Washington, D.C. this week. We've got APLU starting up in a day or so, so the timing was really excellent, and I see a couple other people who are probably here for the same reasons. I want to just focus a little bit today, not so much on what I think you've heard a lot of, because I can't help but imagine, and having skimmed some of the earlier sessions, there's been a lot of individuals talking about fund my discipline, you know, like fund water, fund nutrition, fund forestry, fund this, that, and the other. And I'm sure you could sum all of that up more or less as we must make sure food is available. The supply is stable and food itself is a reliable source of nutrients. We need to increase yields while maintaining environmental sustainability, develop plant and animal varieties that can adapt to changing environments, and research systems where soil can naturally act to remove waste and pollutants and provide incentives to growers to decrease greenhouse gas emissions by managing soil health. We must find ways to decrease food waste by creating more efficient system for distribution, as well as put more focus on the farm-to-fork supply chain to increase trade, jobs, and economic growth. From the western states, of course, we have to highlight the fact that protection and management of our environments, a big issue is water, particularly how we manage water resources in our snow-fed systems, which is quite different than the rain-fed systems of much of the nation. Groundwater recharge, safe aquatic systems, water quality, et cetera, and how that ties into productive ag as well as urban environments. Also out in the West, we're dealing, of course, with wildfires right now. That's certainly been in the media. Forest and range health are key characteristics of living in the western states, as well as how we manage fire. Communities need to better understand and address serious issues that are not faced in many other states that we do face in the West, that are critical. It can literally mean the difference between life and death in many situations. You know, all of these are extremely important issues, and they're issues we at the University of California work on as well. I have to say I can't envy the folks that have to process all of the input you've got so far and try to sort it out and figure what kind of priorities we're going to move on. But I'd like to just take a few moments to suggest a slightly different approach as we move forward too that ties a lot of these together. And I'm hoping that green arrow is the one. So just real quickly, we're probably typical of a lot of systems, although we do have 10 campuses rather than one, in addition to offices in all of our counties, our Ag Experiment Station, and research extension centers scattered all over the state. 10 of them currently, but we're actually looking to increase that with a few additional ones soon. Of course, we have our statewide programs, and I've actually split those out because one of the things we're really putting a lot of focus on is how to start expanding use of volunteers in not just our traditional statewide programs like 4-H and Master Gardeners. Master Food Preservers is a fairly recent one for us, and our California Naturalist, which many other states have a Master Naturalist program. But the others as well are key, and we're trying to actually find out how all of these can start finding synergies and leveraging each other's resources in some creative ways. When you sum it up, I think this one slide is one I use a lot to kind of show the history of what I think most of us do, regardless of the crop. You could have almost this same slide for corn or grazing or apples or whatever. We've got research happening out there. We get a new product such as our tangos. That's something we actually have a patent on. One of the things we like to take a lot of pride in at the University of California, my division A&R, we're less than 1% of the UC overall budget, and yet we file 4% of the patents, and every year when you see the end tally of the top revenue-producing patents, we're usually about half of those, something that folks forget a lot. I have to remind them all the time. But tango was a very popular one. Consumption's increasing, use of land's increasing. It's been a great success story, and yet not without its challenges. As I tell folks in California, I used to joke that we had a new bug every month, and I'm told I'm wrong. It's actually every 6 weeks, but hey, whatever, 6 weeks a month. We get a new bug pretty frequently, and they usually do a lot of damage. This particular one, Asian citrus psyllid, has created a lot of trouble. We've tried a lot of things with controlling vector, with finding parasites for it, and now actually a new thing we're doing with our citizen science is an interactive detection map where we can harness citizens to help us watch vectors and control them and identify them much quicker. So this is pretty typical of what we do. But what I want to suggest is that moving forward, we really have to start thinking about some transformative innovation, some really new ways of doing it, doing our research and actually getting it towards implementation into our extension system. Moving beyond just improving existing methods and processes to completely rethinking systems development. One new strategy is to look at collaborative efforts between experts in, say, soil sciences, plant pathology, biochemistry, etymology, and other fields of sciences, combined with technology experts in robotics, sensors, artificial intelligence, materials, supply chain logistics, energy systems. Doing this in a way that we're really looking at not just today's, but tomorrow's very complex problems in ag. So I want to just highlight a few of the things we're trying to do in California along this line. I'm not claiming they're perfect. Some of them are still somewhat fledgling. We're having some bumps in the road as we implement them. But for AFRI and for NIFA and FR and frankly any of the funding type sources, which is part of what this discussion is about, I think we really need to look and make sure this type of funding of research facilitates these kind of systems work. So real quickly, let me run through a couple. This is one that where we're really partnering up with a lot of different partners to improve both our delivery as well as our research on sustainability, particularly around soil health and things like conservation tillage. It's very exciting. We just signed this in May. We're still working out details, but so far everybody's excited to be engaged. And actually we just signed an agreement with USDA NRCS. They're going to fund half the salary of 2 cooperative extension advisors out in the field on agronomy. This is very exciting for us, and we hope if it works out well, we'll be doing more of that. Another thing is our Central Valley Ag Plus, 28 counties, really putting together a holistic strategy around making this food and beverage manufacturing system happen. If it happens, we're talking 40 to 50,000 jobs, new, very good paying jobs in this arena, tied to not just better logistics and more manufacturing entrepreneurship opportunities, but via research, things like we're looking to try to get food processing down to net zero use of water. We actually have a facility, the Mondavi Center at UC Davis, that is very close to that. They're reusing water 10 or more times in the processing of food crops. That, as well as energy savings, offer huge abilities. Savings in logistics and food handling that actually will help the quality of the food too. A lot of partners, very exciting. This one's been going on a couple years. This is another example of how we're working with things like our national laboratories, rural development, and other partners to facilitate better mapping. IGIS is one of my statewide programs on informatics and geographic information systems where we offer that kind of support to different efforts like this. Really crucial for good policy making as well as management decisions. Another one is our Working Landscapes Action Team at the State Economic Summit. We had to work really hard to get this action team because when the very first State Economic Summit happened in California in 2012, I was there, and at the end of the day, you would have sworn the California economy was thriving on a barren asteroid in outer space. There was zero discussion of agriculture, natural resources, soil, water, anything around that. So we actually went out and commissioned this report. This is 2012 data. We're updating that now, looking at what is actually the real impact of working landscapes in California. And frankly, the numbers are going to go up considerably when we get the new report in. Similar to that, right now, we've just kicked off our effort to catalyze a statewide support system for innovation and entrepreneurship. We're playing the role of convener as well as putting some resources on the table, but going out into region by region and pulling together the existing players to say, okay, what's here and what's not here, and how do we get it here, and how do we leverage each other's resources and really make sure this happens? Because the reality is, if you're not in an urban area or near a campus, you don't have access to that kind of resources. You just really don't. So our focus here, obviously, is agriculture, natural resources, and our rural communities. We're doing things like hosting apps for ag and a lot of other very exciting things. Actually, we've had 4 or 5 of our apps from our ag hackathons go into commercialization. Some of them have won some international awards, so it's pretty exciting. We're teaming up young people. We're trying to take this the next step and get our 4-H clubs much more active in this kind of thing. Similarly, as part of the Vine, we're actually moving into, as part of that statewide system, bringing together a lot of very diverse partners, working on things like making sure we've got incubators and maker spaces, that we're working with things like our U.S. Patent and Trade Office, which if you folks haven't actually checked out their website, you ought to. They have curriculum available targeting grade school to get our kids thinking about being innovators and inventors. We're now partnering that up with 4-H and are extremely excited about moving forward that way. Getting people to think about farm to fork. One of our county fairgrounds, the CEO there, has now, and it's a long story, but long story short, has now incubated over 15 small companies in the last few years. We're trying to figure out how she did it so successfully so that our other county fairgrounds can do a similar type of activity, part of that replication effort. As we do this, we've got to really keep in mind that data is important. One of the things we're also doing, UC just announced a big program lately with our 5 medical centers, where we're going to be taking all the data from those to be able to do very big data mining and analysis to improve health outcomes. We're using that as a template to start figuring out how we take all of our data from UC, as well as USDA and others, to start doing similar data mining and analysis to help us with ag and food and natural resource issues. This is that data hub that we'll be working on. And then similarly, last but not least, very, very exciting project is really moving to things like citizen science and facilitating that. One of the greatest fears I have is this very scientifically illiterate population we have out there. And how on earth are we going to turn that around? And if we don't turn that around, how are we ever going to start getting better policy and better decision making from our leaders? So we're trying to find ways to engage certainly our 4-H kids in a variety of ways, but adults too. We just tapped into our master gardeners to actually help us with that interactive detection map, and even doing door knocking concerning Asian citrus psyllid when we found hotspots, and get them to try to teach and educate backyard folks with citrus trees on the importance of perhaps, losing that beloved citrus tree. They're neighbors. People listen to them more so than they do to an average scientist. So there's a great role and a great synergy here. And I guess that would be kind of like my last comments. We need solutions that look at this interoperability of devices, integrating our data, making ease and use of that kind of effectiveness of ag tech available. We've got to just really start looking at new ways to do business, much like the biomedical revolution of the last couple decades. The integration of multiple disciplines, in fact, that's my last slide. The integration of multiple disciplines in single projects as well as long-term projects can lead to transformative innovation that promises productivity of ag production, food safety, ecosystem services, while also giving rise to new opportunities for businesses and economic development. I end with just a final comment that as we move forward, NIFA and all of its partners, finding new ways to facilitate this type of multidisciplinary research, I think is really of the utmost vital need. So thank you, and I'm glad to be here today. Oh, excuse me. Is there a question? It's after lunch. They're still digesting.
All right. Thank you. Next up, we have Stephanie Lansing from the University of Maryland.
Okay. Get these this down here. All right. So I do actually like talking after lunch because I get to make really bad jokes about digesting your food while I talk about digestion. So what I'm going to talk about is just talk about one technology, but I'm not really going to talk about what digestion is because that's not really what's important here. What's important is the fact that this is an example of a technology that has so many different hats and so many different facets that it often has trouble finding a place in NIFA. So I've gotten grants on AMR, from SARE, from other things, but it's always a little bit here and there. So just as an example, I'm right now the chair of the Northeast Extension Farm Energy Group, right? So spoke at a Farm Energy Group. Last year I was speaking at the Northeast Greenhouse Gas Summit, right? So that's another category. Last month it was the Environmental Law Conference. A couple weeks before that, it was the Nutrient Management Group. So all of these have to do with this one technology, but yet it's in all different facets. So what I'm going to talk about is actually food digestion, because that adds even another complexity to it. And that's where it really takes, right now, you say we want interdisciplinary teams, but yet there is no place for technologies like this often that need interdisciplinary teams because there's not a silo for it to go in. All right, let's see if I can figure this out. Next. All right, so just for those of you that don't know, the 2-second version, digesters, food waste, crop waste, anything, sewage sludge, goes into the digester, breaks down with microorganisms, you get biogas out, just like methane. You can, natural gas, that methane can then be used any way we use natural gas for vehicle fuel, but it's mainly used for electricity production. But all the nutrients that go in basically come out, okay? So you have organics coming in, methane being produced, and nutrients coming out. So if we look at where we are in terms of anaerobic digestion, we have 265 on-farm digesters. Germany has almost 10,000 on-farm digesters, right? China, that's not a typo, that is 40 million, okay? So this is a place where someone like Germany is, with less than 30% of our agricultural output, has so many more of these systems. They have so many digesters that one of the things that they're doing is actually holding the biogas in some of their systems and using it at like 4 or 5 o'clock to round out when the solar energy goes down, and using actually biogas as a battery system. But again, with 265 digesters, I mean, we're nowhere near where we could be in terms of just this one technology. So if we look at where we are, the operational digesters, so this is a map from, so AgStar is basically between EPA, USDA, and DOE. But basically, they just provide a clearinghouse of information. They don't provide research funding or any money directly to farmers. They just provide information. So this is some of the things that they produce, showing where we have our digesters. And again, some of them are co-digesting with food waste, but most of them are just on very large dairy farms. So we're talking 1,000 cows or more. But if we look at where we are, so again, we're looking at 10,000 digesters in Germany versus a couple hundred here, and we're only getting 30 or 40 new digesters a year. So the penetration isn't coming. And they're in these very large farms. So if we look at our average dairy farm, whether it's Maryland or anywhere else, our average cow is on a small farm. So there's where we're talking about economic development and rural development. And our average cow is small farmers. We employ lots of small farmers. Sorry, our average farm is very small. Our average cow is on a large farm because our large farms are very large, right? So most of these farms that have digesters, we're talking about 1 in 2,000 cow operations, which really, when we're talking about sustainability, one of the things we want to do is help the small farmer and help with the rural development. And unfortunately, where we are within the U.S., we aren't able to do that. While in other countries, they've been able to build digesters on these very small scales. So if we look at why we have digesters and why we care, again, they're in one spot. It's easy to do. The manure's there. All we have to do is put it in a digester, we get a renewable energy, and then we still have the nutrients on the back end to use for fertilizer. So it's just, if you have a lagoon, just put a cover over it, and then we have renewable energy. Without digestion, without putting a cover over that lagoon, 10% of all greenhouse gas emissions associated with agriculture are from methane coming in from those lagoons. So by just putting the cover over it, we've solved the problem. By then putting a generator on the end, we're now creating renewable energy. So it's something that can solve multiple problems. Again, then you have the food waste coming in. And this is where you have states like Massachusetts that says, okay, no food going to landfills by 2025, right? Where are they going to go? Right now we have some composting operations. We also have, they could go in digesters. Almost all the 10,000 digesters in Germany co-digest. Why? Because the food that we have, if I put the food waste directly in the digester, I have so much more energy production than if I put it in my stomach first or the cow's stomach first, and then I take that manure in and put it into the digester. And so we could greatly increase the energy production from these systems by adding this food waste. But we don't really have that mechanism in place right now. And again, what Germany has done they actually have a policy where if you're a smaller farm, you get a higher electricity price. So that helps because, again, the costs are not linear with these systems. It's not if you have 500 cows, it's half the cost of 1,000 cows. It doesn't go that way because the pipes and the generators and some of these things don't have a linear scale. And so they give higher prices to smaller farms. So we look at what the EPA has said. The EPA has said, you know what, we have 11,000 digesters we could have right now with existing technology, with existing, based on large farms that we have in the U.S., which would power 3 million homes and reduce greenhouse gases by 35 million metric tons of CO2. Yet we have, it's supposed to be 265. I gave them an extra 100. We have 265, right? And so the thing is we've identified this. So why aren't we doing that leap? What is the problem here? And this is something that NIFA can try to address, is looking at if we have this technology, why are we so far behind? And so again, part of it being the food waste digestion. When we get into food waste, how is the food waste going to get to the digesters? How are we collecting the food waste? If we're having these initiatives where we want to increase sustainability and increase food waste going from less of it going to the landfill, we need studies to really study the infrastructure of food sustainability. How can the waste get to these farms, and then how can we digest them? If we have food waste, again, it greatly increases the biogas yield. This is a farm in Maryland. Again, this is one of these farms where it's not a multi-million-dollar farm. They just put a cover over their lagoon, but they're adding food waste in there, and they're a very successful farm. And what you can see here is, again, the food waste, the chicken, and so those red bar graphs are basically the chicken, the meatball waste. It's the manures, the little orange one on the end. So again, it's not even comparable in terms of the amount of biogas production you can get, but yet food waste policy, it's really important about what are the policies in place, what's the infrastructure in place, what's the transportation, how do you get farmers to get with the food waste producers and have a synergy. For this farm, this is Kilby Farm, what he did, he has a middleman who actually brings food waste from New Jersey to Maryland. Okay, is that sustainable? The reason why they do it is because they get extra points on the Walmart Sustainability Index. These are the meatball factory that actually produces meatballs that goes into Walmart. And if they dispose their waste into a digester, they're a preferred buyer in terms of Walmart Sustainability Index. So there's ways to get it done, but is really that sustainable, bringing it from New Jersey down to Maryland? But economically, it works for this farm. And so they get a lot more biogas production from it. They get paid for it. So the tipping fee that they get pays the loan that they took out to build their digester. And then the electricity is just free, right? And then they get money from selling it back to the grid. So there's ways to do this, and there's the infrastructure's in place, but it's just all over the place. There is no integrated policy. So then we look at the nutrient management side. So again, the oversighted digesters, it's just part of their nutrient management plan. Whether I have a lagoon or a digester, it's part of getting it from the cow to the field. And so the digester, again, the effluent, most of the solids go down, the methane goes down, the carbon goes down, the odors go down, but I still have a lot of nutrients. And what I can do with that, though, I can do manure injection really easily because I've lost a lot of my solids. When I do apply, I can apply throughout the summer because it's not going to smell. And so I can apply in other times. I can also do advanced nutrient treatment after that application. So I can actually we've done struvite extractions in our lab and in the field. We've done other things, wetlands. We've done aeration ponds. So we can actually extract some of those nutrients that we couldn't do if we hadn't digested it first, because it's in the matrix, the poultry litter matrix, the cow manure matrix. So there's things we can do. But now we're going to add food waste. So that's going to make us economically favorable, like it did for Kilby Farm. But now that food waste has to go into my farm nutrient management plan. But yet none of these things are really studied from a large global scale on how all of this is going to come together. So again, but then we have to understand the dairy industry. Right now, farm prices are really low. So you're saying, farmers, go build digesters. I don't have money to pay my employees, so how am I going to do that? Co-digestion works, but again, we don't have the infrastructure. We need to understand. The other thing is, again, poultry litter digestion. We've done that a little bit. The problem is, in Germany, they co-digest the poultry, the swine, the dairy. We've got poultry in Maryland. We have swine somewhere else. We have dairy somewhere else, and so we don't really have that infrastructure. So how are we going to make it work for us with co-digestion? And again, there's no monetary benefits of digestion. So I talked about doing work with with antibiotic resistance. Again, I do work with digestion and composting on antibiotic resistance, but there is no money for the farmer for actually putting in these systems for some of these ancillary benefits that were really important. So again, if I'm a dairy cow and I'm sick, my milk doesn't go into the food system, but my manure, it still does. Right? And so if you have some sort of advanced manure technology, you should be able to get some sort of a benefit from that. And we haven't done the policy or financial analysis for that. And again, the difficulty paying financing. I'm a small farmer and I want to build a digester. I have to go a power purchase agreement. I have to get the food waste and have them pay me for taking the food waste in. I have to, if I want greenhouse gas credits or RECs, I have to know how to manage all of this. So it's difficult, and we need that kind of education to farmers to do that. And so the conclusions are, there are no silver bullets. We know the benefits. We've quantified them. There's an industry ready to build you a system, but yet it's not necessarily economical. And the pieces are all over the place. And not only money, but policy efforts are need to drive adoption rates. And we really need to look at the policy, at funding, and we need to look at it from this larger scale, because it's not one place. Again, I'm someone who wears many hats. Wastewater sludge. After a digester, the sludge goes onto the farm fields. I mean, there's so many ways that these interact, but yet there isn't really a mechanism within NIFA to fund this type of large-scale integrated research that has a lot of benefits. And I'll take any questions. All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up we have Radha Krishna from Penn State University.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to give us some of our feedback to the priorities that the NIFA is talking about or garnering from all of us gathered here and elsewhere in Sacramento, Atlanta, and other places. And first, I bring greetings from the American Association for Agriculture Education, which I represent, and also the NCAC 24 Agricultural Education Research Committee that is component of all social scientists, educational scientists, and extension educators across the land-grant university. And some of you this morning talked about your connection to NIFA. I have a little connection too. So your NIFA director, Dr. Sunny Ramaswamy, I and my newly minted colleague, Anil, all came from the same institution, but years apart. So it is just a pleasure to have that kind of a proud moment to share with you. Is this okay. As I said, I represent NCAC 24. It is an advisory committee mostly made up of department head, chairs, program leaders, and others, particularly in the social science of agriculture sciences, and also with a particular administrative advisor, specifically a associate dean for graduate education and research. Our goal is to expand membership across our member institution, support multi-state projects, as some of you mentioned earlier, integrated projects and interdisciplinary and so on and so forth, and also keep a communication going on with agriculture research priorities, capabilities to policymakers, of course, NIFA, USDA, and other federal and local entities. What I'm going to share with you about who we are and what we do, and as you can see from this slide, it is agriculture education broadly defined, includes teacher education, extension education, leadership and community development, communications, and in the last couple of years, we have also engaged in international agriculture development. And because of this expertise we are well positioned to address the 21st century challenges, both in agriculture and allied sectors. NIFA, educational institutions, and research enterprises, we can all collectively work to find solutions to world's wicked problems or the challenges. Again, I want to emphasize that we are present in every land-grant university, every state, every county, perhaps every school district. This is a valuable thing to say about our grassroots involvement. Okay? Now, here is our approach and strategy to the priority listening session is that I will summarize at the last slide what we are on this is 21st century challenges to agriculture and environment require approaches that consider the wide spectrum of stakeholders, perspectives, and expertise. That you have already undertaken, and there is more value to it because hearing from different perspectives will understand the problems in a better way and provide some solutions that are feasible and also provides you some impact data. Skillful interventions must take place through educational institutions, businesses, governments, and other social systems to discover and adopt solution to these challenges. Again, some of you have mentioned collaborative efforts, integrated efforts, multidisciplinary efforts. All these fit into our strategy of addressing the priorities. Equally important is the engagement of multidisciplinary scholarship that integrates faculty roles of teaching, research, and extension. Combining bench and social sciences are needed. That's where the investment can be made. One thing is today, challenge we face is a single discipline cannot solve any problems that confront us. We need a multidisciplinary approach, integrated approach to solve the problems we face. And just engagement is not enough. We must develop human capacity that is planned, integrated, and embedded to address these complex issues. Particularly as social scientists, extension folks who are themselves called as in the business of people, we need to have that kind of an engagement. And I have specific requests to, again, as we said, knowledge plus application plus value equals transforming lives. That is the outcome or the goal of these listening sessions. We need to look into that, how providing knowledge has application and then use and ultimately meets the needs of the NIFA and other funding agencies. I want to emphasize here that need for social science presence is very, very important. It is stronger than ever before. Presence of engagement of social scientists is imperative for creating and delivering programs that increase science-based knowledge and about modern food production and its health, relationship with human health, economic well-being, social stability, energy production, and environmental sustainability. Some of you mentioned earlier this about plant health, animal health, and One Health. We have at Penn State all the three things combined: plant health, animal health, and human health. We have a huge project that is going on, combining the animal science groups, the plant science group, and the social science, nutrition, and so on and so forth. Again, I encourage NIFA to provide substantial involvement in social science research. Social science faculty or experts in RFPs and RFPs is paramount if we are to showcase the value of our programs, efforts, and approaches to public good. It is very important involving, again, all of the presentations this morning had a specific interest in their own disciplinary areas, whether it is consumer horticulture, or is it community development, or is it animal science, or whatever it is, but there is a need for an integrated effort. And looking at the two questions you asked us about the priority, I did not go through the specific part of it, but I created a little framework for us. Oh, I think I'm missing a little slide here in my notes. One thing is technical content is emphasized, but it doesn't alone can help us solve the issues. Taking about 5 or 10% for evaluation or education in an RFP is not going to cut it. We need to have more effort to human capacity building, development that is planned, integrated, and embedded in the proposal is essential to address complex issues. So here is the one that I created this framework for us to, here is you are asking for us to, listening from us about all the things that we do. In that extreme end, NIFA listens in science and in to do some regional, multi-state, national projects. Very much, there are some regional things, some national things, and some specific things at the state level could be done. And we must integrate through teaching, research, and extension. Again, as my discipline is business is education. Education, creating courses, developing online programs, extension programs, and evaluation and assessment. We have the resources, we have the things to address wicked problems, complex problems that is confronting us, whether it is youth development, whether it is nutrition, or obesity, or bullying, opioid crisis, what have you. All those we could do with our efforts. And finally, whenever I go and do programs in extension, people ask the question, what happened as a result of your program? Assessment and evaluation are key to success for whatever efforts that NIFA or we as coming from educational institutions. We need to assess overall impact. I think Dr. O'Neill mentioned about outcome measures, individual outcome measures, specific measures. Dr. Jones mentioned about impact on positive youth development, long-term impact, changing in behaviors. It is not a 2-year project, it is a 5-year, 6-year project. We need to build mechanisms to assess those to see where we are heading. Cost effectiveness, rate of return on investment are critical things that NIFA must consider in order to make a difference. If we want to transform lives, that's what we have to do. And again, as you can see, we are a community of educators, programmers, scientists, teachers, impacting many. Again, thank you for the opportunity to listen to us in order for you to help craft the future agricultural and environmental agenda. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. Next up is Matt Carr from the Algae Biomass Organization. And if you are interested in speaking after Matt, can you just raise your hand? Okay, maybe you'll be inspired in the next 10 minutes. But if not, we'll have some closing comments before the end of the day. Take it away.
Great. Hello, I'm Matt Carr, Executive Director of the Algae Biomass Organization. Very much appreciate the opportunity to provide our input, and also want to recognize Mark Allen from Excelergy Corporation is here. He's my board vice chair and policy committee chair, and would be glad to follow up with you as would I. So I want to take you through a whirlwind tour of the world of algae and how it fits into the U.S. agricultural scene, and then take you to research priorities that we'd like to recommend to NIFA. Just a little bit about ABO by way of background: trade association for the algae technology sector. We have over 200 members. They include corporate and institutional members, businesses and universities, as well as individual scientists. And also, we are hosts to the world's largest algae conference, which just wrapped up last week in Salt Lake City. Just a snapshot of our corporate and institutional members there. You'll see some large, big names, but mostly early stage technology developers out of universities and national labs and garages doing some really amazing things. I wanted to walk through sort of 4 key areas of the role of algae in agriculture: nutrient management and soil health. We've already heard a little bit about today. We agree this is a key area in need of investment. Expanding agricultural production and the role of algae in bringing new land into production, as well as increasing productivity of existing land. Algae is a sustainable new crop for a variety of end uses, and then the role of algae in job creation in the rural economy. Just quickly by way of background, what do we mean when we talk about algae? Of course, there's some of the earliest life forms, extremely diverse. We only have, I think, a narrow slice of knowledge about what's out there in the algae and microbial world. We consider algae to be at everything from microscopic to the giant kelp seaweeds, and we also are very inclusive, so we include cyanobacteria and some other sort of marginally algae-like organisms. We're very welcoming as an association. Mostly photosynthetic organisms we're talking about. Some feed on sugars or do both. All right, so when we talk about the role of algae in nutrient management, we're already beginning to see some interesting work on the deployment of algae-based systems for tertiary wastewater treatment now. In municipalities, algae love to gobble up nitrogen as well as phosphorus, depending on the conditions. Nitrogen is a big problem from cities, but also, of course, from farms as well as rural manufacturing. The first large-scale commercial tertiary algae-based water treatment system is now under construction in Salt Lake City. We visited that last week. But we also have some really interesting on-farm work that's happening at a number of institutions, including Utah State, on managing nutrients from farms, integrating with digesters, and otherwise trying to keep the nutrients on farm and keeping the value there with the farmer. At the other end of the nutrient chain, once the algae have gobbled up the nitrogen and phosphorus, as well as carbon, they can serve a really valuable role in returning those nutrients to the soil. We have a number of folks that are working on developing algae-based soil amendments and biofertilizers that I think have the potential for profound impact on the sustainability of agriculture, precision agriculture, reducing the need for nitrogen-based fertilizers and the subsequent runoff and emissions therefrom. Some really exciting work that's happening in that space, and already some really exciting work that's happening in the fields in piloting some of these products. Just one example here of the algae-fed melon on the left and the traditional melon on the right, and all the really appealing characteristics that you get with that switch. Not just nitrogen and phosphorus, but algae are highly efficient photosynthetic organisms, so they also take in carbon. Some really interesting work that's happening on the use of algae for carbon capture and reuse, including at ethanol facilities, a very appealing place to do this work. We have carbon dioxide from the fermentation process, as well as wastewater that's rich in nutrients, all food for algae, and the algae can then become food for either the corn or other crop, or for neighboring dairy cattle operations. So very interesting work there. Some work by the Department of Energy to analyze the opportunity for the co-location of algae-based carbon capture systems with point sources. Looked at coal, with lots of opportunities in the Gulf region, as well as ethanol in the upper Midwest. So I think a lot of promise there. At its heart, though, algae, I think, represent an opportunity for a highly promising, highly productive, and highly sustainable new crop because of its exceptionally fast growth rate. And when you look at the opportunity for biomass yield, microalgae really blows away anything that we are doing today on terrestrial agriculture here in the U.S. Sugarcane comes close to current microalgae productivity, but we're really at best a year 10 probably of development of this and domestication of this crop compared to 100 plus years of domestication of some of the other crops. So I think that there's only upside to come on this. And so when you get that intensification, combine it with the fact that really when you're growing algae, you don't need fresh water. In fact, fresh water is the last thing you'd probably use. Wastewater, saline, aquifers, water that's really of little or no use to us in agriculture or domestic use. The carbon sequestration potential and the intensity of land use make for a really, really appealing sustainability profile. In terms of end uses, I'll just kind of fly through some of the most interesting work that's happening here. A whole range of interesting new food products that are emerging. Mayonnaise, beverages, plant-based protein substitutes for meat and shrimp, baking, energy bars. Some really interesting niche or nutrition applications for human and animal health, including powerful antioxidants, natural food colors. But really, I think the big growth area is likely to be in feed, and the very appealing attributes of some strains of algae and their ability to produce marine omega-3 oils, which otherwise can only be obtained from fish, shrimp, and other marine organisms. This has already resulted in the construction of probably a half dozen industrial production facilities for algal omega-3 oils just here in the U.S. alone over the last 3 years, with more to come. And that becomes, I think, the tip of the spear for moving into broader adoption of algae as a supplement to sort of whole feed supplement. And when you look at some analysis of bringing algae in as a feed substitute, when you factor in the land use intensification, you have some very appealing potential scenarios in the future of returning other marginal lands back to their native state, afforestation, and some great outcomes for the climate. Other really interesting applications in animal health, companies that have developed beta-glucan and other immune stimulants from algae platforms. Some limited good work that's already been done, in part supported by NIFA, on feed trials, but I think a lot more needs to be done. And we're on the verge of seeing broader acceptance of algal ingredients in the feed world, but there's still work to be done there. And then finally, some really interesting applications in bio-based products, advanced biofuels, aviation biofuels, just some examples from the past year or so. Also want to mention really sort of interesting trends in macro algae, seaweed farming in coastal waters. Really, this has been done for centuries overseas, but to a very limited extent here. I know NIFA has funded some work recently in this area. I think this is another area of potential growth and opportunity. It brings us to jobs in rural economy. We're talking about bringing in a whole new generation of farmers. These are young folks coming into agriculture, often from urban settings, and bringing jobs to some of the hardest hit regions of the country. And those are jobs farming, but also in value-added manufacturing. So R&D priorities in these areas for nutrient recycling and soil health. More research and pilot work needs to be done on on-farm algae-based nutrient recovery systems alone and in conjunction with digesters, for example. Feed trials of algal soil amendments and biofertilizers are going to be essential to adoption of those products. And food, feed, and nutrition, more feed trials and ongoing research on development of algal feed ingredients. I think this is one particular area where, along with some other emerging new protein sources, it would be really interesting to look at, potentially a center of excellence for development and overcoming barriers to entry of some of these new protein sources that we're going to desperately need with the growing populations. Support for new product development, both in food and feed, but also bioproducts. And then work on farming, workforce training, education, crop production, and pest management. We've had a lot of good support already from the Department of Energy in their early investment in algae for biofuels. That work continues, but really it's focused on the algae production systems themselves, the biology, the systems engineering. But when it comes to downstream and upstream applications and integrations with agriculture, that's where the real gap is in research and development, and we think it's a very much an appropriate role for NIFA to grow its participation. This is us, my contact information, and that's my time. Thanks. Any questions?
Can you please, if you have a question, come up to the mic and introduce yourself? Thank you.
So Matt, I was going to have you comment on the Algae Foundation and the work they've done under educational work they've done and the grants received and the opportunity for additional grant for that education program.
Great, thank you, perfect. This is how you buy yourself a little extra time, you plant a little question. So AVO also has a foundation arm whose mission is to support the development of K through gray education in algae. So we have a program in K through 12 and developing a kit for teachers. Also, we've developed a community college certification program for a number of different tracks in algae. Some great work that's been done on a shoestring with a small grant from the Department of Energy, but we think this could fit very neatly into some of the education work that USDA is supporting, and I think there's a lot more that we can and should be doing in that space as well. So thanks for raising that, Mark.
All right, thank
Thanks.
you. Well, we have at least one interested unscheduled speaker. So I would like to invite Professor Todd Brashears up from Texas Tech University, the Department of Agricultural Education and Communications. Thank you.
I can honestly say I don't think I've ever gone to speak in an event where I knew that everyone in the room was disappointed to see me. So I'll be brief in my comments. I did not plan to speak today, but through some urging, I felt like there's some areas that we need to address before we get away today. So let me introduce myself. I'm Todd Brashears. I'm a professor of ag leadership at Texas Tech, and I'm in the Department of Ag Education and Communications. And so, like Rama and others in the room, I'm a social scientist. I deal with the people who deal with agriculture, and that's the approach we take. In 1960, one American farmer fed 25 people. We now claim that number is 155, and we do so with pride. We say that we are more efficient. We owe gains to our basic colleagues who have developed new breeds of plants and animals. new technologies that have allowed us to increase that number. There's a billboard in Kansas that I've passed for years where they have that statement. It says one American farmer, maybe it says one Kansas farmer feeds, and it has been painted over so many times and the number changed. You can tell that the farmer that does that is proud about that fact. But what we don't consider are the 154 that are now 1, 2, or 3 or more generations removed from production agriculture. We get further and further away from understanding where our food is produced from. And by ignoring those 154 and only focusing on the one, I think we're doing ourselves and our industry a great disservice. We tell the story about the young man who, when asked where chocolate milk comes from, responds with, of course, it comes from brown cows. And I've told that story and I've laughed about it myself, but as I think about that, I realize that young man is going to grow up to be a parent, to be a food purchaser, to be a voter, and quite possibly to be a legislator who is making decisions, budget decisions, and needs to be informed on policy. Like many of our students, I'm a product of West Texas. I grew up on a cattle ranch. My family still farms in West Texas. They're harvesting cotton today, about 3,000 acres. They also raise cattle. That's a pretty good snapshot of what our students look like. Our motto, if you're familiar with where Lubbock, Texas is, it's not close to anything. We say, from here it's possible. Our students laugh about that because they know that it's 350 miles to the nearest city from Lubbock. So it has to be possible at Texas Tech because it's too far to go anywhere else. Many of our 2,300 students in our college are from those farms that you drive through and those ranches. These kids commonly count land mass, not in acres, but in sections. And as they come into our department, I'm constantly amazed at how their knowledge about agriculture is really limited to their own personal experiences and their boundaries. And part of what we have to do is to expand that for not just for our students, but for all students. One of the most popular courses in our department is an agricultural advocacy course, which really just teaches the basics of what agriculture is, both domestically and internationally. And what amazes me is that we have to do that within a College of Agriculture. But we look at our students and even if they are coming from an ag background, they still have to have an expanded and a global view. We've been fortunate at Texas Tech to receive some non-land grant capacity building funds over the years. We created, beginning in 2012, we created a program we call the SOAR Scholars. SOAR is an acronym that stands for Sustaining Our World Through Education and Research, but it's also our logo, and we use Van Gogh's image of the sower casting out seeds for our students to identify with. Our goal is to bring in these interns to be with them for a semester and then cast them back out into the ag industry to make significant changes. These students come to us, we match them with mentors within the College of Agriculture. They spend a semester conducting research, going to different field trips and understanding the ag process, and then we recruit them back into graduate school. So that NIFA-funded program has resulted in dozens of underrepresented minority students who have come into graduate school. Texas Tech announced last week that we have reached the threshold to become a Hispanic-serving institution. Something that we're very proud about, something we've worked pretty hard for. We like to think, at least in my building, that this NIFA program, which has specifically targeted Hispanic populations for graduate school, had some small part in getting us to that level. I would urge NIFA to really focus on their ability to expand these non-land grant capacity building programs. Programs like ours, one of the 70 non-land grant universities that has a College of Agriculture, really struggle for the ability to get resources and build that capacity. Most universities, while Texas Tech is rather large for a non-land grant, I think maybe second right now to one of the California schools, but we're rather an anomaly in that group. Most of the universities have fledgling research programs. They struggle for resources. It's incredibly important for them to have the ability to develop that, to produce the students who are going to change the industry. As we look at capacity building for non-land grants, I would also urge the focus on ag literacy. It's going to be incredibly important as we move forward to make sure that those 154 that we're looking at are making educated decisions. They're voting for people who are making educated decisions, and they're supporting the agricultural industry. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Todd? All right. Anyone else interested in providing comment today? All right, come on up. At this point, I don't have everyone's name and affiliation, but you're welcome to come up.
Mark Allen, I'm with Excelergy Corporation and also the vice chair for the Algae Biomass Organization. And I didn't plan to speak, but I did want to take the opportunity to mention some things that occurred last week at our annual conference. I chaired a session, a plenary session, with probably 400 people in the room on nutrient recycling. So I want to make the point here that we get more focused going forward in agriculture on sustainability, and that we don't, and I loved the example earlier on the digesters and taking food waste and animal waste. But I think we have to think about this as more completely through even the human manure, the stuff we send to municipal treatment plants and all the nutrients that concentrate there. And some of the things we're doing in the algae field is, with the digesters, is taking the liquid that comes off that has the concentrated nitrogen and phosphorus and some other goodies, and processing that through something like algae, which will use up that nutrient. Also, if you separate CO2 off your digester gas, we'll take that, we'll close the loop completely on that, and produce, for instance, animal feed protein or biofertilizer, and really start to close the loop on the nutrient cycle, which is agriculture, but understand it in a bigger context, extend it out into some other areas. And I also wanted to mention climate change. Invariably, agriculture is caught up in this. It is at the moment. We don't say enough about it. So it's going to bear the brunt of a lot of what we see coming in climate change, from rainfall distribution, temperatures in the air, temperatures in the soil, and so forth. But it's also a tremendous opportunity to do something about climate change in how agriculture is practiced and how we close the loop on nutrients. And I think any organization that is looking at fashioning research and practical initiatives in agriculture going forward really needs to be looking every day at addressing closing the nutrient cycle and the opportunities and the mitigation we're going to have to do in agriculture as well. So thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out and contributing to NIFA Listens. If you would like to spread this opportunity to your colleagues and other stakeholders, we are still accepting comment through December 1st via the stakeholder input form on our website. That website is www.nifa.usda.gov/NIFA Listens. And I'd like to invite Dr. Qureshi back up for a few closing comments.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, we had a great day today. I want to conclude by saying when our new Secretary of Agriculture, Dr. Sonny Perdue, was going through the hearing process and came and addressed us, he used a phrase called, and I quote, "Do good and feed everyone." Wow, what a powerful and overarching statement and concept and message that is. That's what we do in NIFA. We do good, but to show that we truly do good is that if what we are doing aligns with what you think is good. Is that confusing? No. Very simple, too many words. So what I'm truly saying is that myself and my colleagues who have this responsibility of ensuring that the programs which we offer through NIFA are not only aligned with the priorities which are given to us through the legislation, through the Secretary, through the Office of the Science and Technology Policy, Farm Bill, and what have you, but also the priorities which you, the stakeholders, the partners think are important in food, agriculture, natural resources, and human sciences. That's the breadth or the context of when our secretaries say, feed everyone, because that context includes all of these entities which I just listed or stated. I know it takes a lot of time and effort and energy to do this exercise. We heard today that some of you, before coming here to provide your input, really huddled amongst your own constituencies. You had sessions, you had conference calls, you had meetings to really think through what is it that you're going to share with us today. We have representative from Northeast. We heard from Mike O'Neill. We had Ed Jones from ECOP. You know, they're not individuals. They huddled together and thought through in a very purposeful way what should be the next priorities for NIFA and what are the next opportunities for us in this arena of production agriculture or food agriculture, natural resource and human sciences. So I truly, truly thank you for all the time you have taken to provide in-person comments. I think between all the 4 sessions we had so far, about 80 to 100 people actually spoke on the podium like this altogether. Probably have 400 or 500 comments which we have received through portal so far. And our portal, as Megan said, is still open until December 1st. So we really hope that more input would continue to come, and that would then make, that would then start our job, which is how do we take all this input and synthesize it in a meaningful way that we can essentially do 2 things. One, this feedback would absolutely inform our budget process, as I said earlier this morning. And second, this input hopefully would be prioritized in a shape or form that we can actually insert it and reflect it in our request for applications for future program offerings. So in addition to thanking you and letting you know that what is the next step, these presentations from all 4 sessions, by the way, this was the last of 4 external listening sessions we've had today. All of these webcast presentations, as well as the transcripts, would be available on NIFA website. I think previous 2 are already available. 3rd one is probably in process, and this would also be available in its entirety on our website. And hopefully when we will synthesize this information into certain priorities, we'll also be able to absolutely share with you all. So before I conclude, I also want to thank my NIFA colleagues. They have been truly engaged in this process for a while. And this is our job. This is what we do. And as I said, we will certainly report back. But I also want to take, again, this opportunity to thank Dr. Merrill Broussard, who really has been an inspiration for all of us. This was his vision, that we not only listen to our own subject matter experts, but we do a really earnest effort to reach out to what Secretary calls us, that we are in the business of public service. And our public service is really listening to you and then providing financial assistance, which the legislators and the lawmakers have entrusted upon us to do. So thank you so much again, and this concludes our fourth and the final NIFA external stakeholder listening session. So we stand adjourned till we communicate further. Thank you so much, everybody.